great.
That's right. The guy at the ground floor had already put up a good fight. Let's see what the other side brings to us as Penta question marks squares off against Golden Guardians.
But there's 4 question marks on the logo and 5 question marks underneath. So I think they're just trying to confuse us here. But anyway, we're going into this first game. As we play question marks versus Golden Guardians here, it looks like they're playing the same setup. Yeah, they're all playing the Vengeance Demon Hunt Disc Priest. We do see a nice slow fall skip here actually by the question marks on the left side of the screen. So they're just completely skipping the first trash pack, which is interesting. So probably something with their pride timing as they just immediately go into this next trash pack while Golden Guardian is dealing with this initial trash pack at the start of the dungeon.
Yeah, definitely interesting as well. There's a lot of trash count in this dungeon, so you can definitely opt to skip these large pulls, even if they give about 7 or 8% trash. You can definitely make up the trash percent later on in the Ardenwold wing of the dungeon. So it's interesting to see that. And also, once you've unlocked one of these checkpoints here by entering one of the wings, you never really have to go back to the start of the dungeon. So definitely interesting. That being said, does the boss port you there? And is the trash there if he does port you there on the final boss, Mizala? I'm interested to see what actually happens if they don't end up going back to deal with that trash pack. I'm pretty sure it does.
Yeah, so that's actually a very good thought, because then they can just, they can just AoE it down theoretically, but it's very possible. We'll see later on as they're going through this dungeon. First, they have to deal with all of the other bosses first. Looks like they're also doing one of these enraged spirits. Now, these spirits are actually incredibly inefficient to deal with because they do a lot of AoE damage, so it's incredibly hard for them to pull anything on top because you just need to completely single target focus the spirit, otherwise it's going to cast a lot of those enraged casts and it's just going to kill your group. We do see one death also happening for Golden Guardians as Yoda went down. They did have to commit the battle rest.
Yeah, but in the process, they've also set up this massive pull where they pretty much pulled all of the trash in this Hakar wing. We're also seeing this happening just now from our question mark friends as well, minus the final trash pack. And they're going to be stunning it with that Night Fae urn on the side, which lets them just go ahead and AoE it down before any of the major mechanics happen, in addition to using things like the Silent Sigil, as well as the leg sweep from the monk to make sure none of those healing casts get off on the group. But with this massive trash pack going on, you have to really make sure that you're only using your interrupts on those healing spells after your AoE CC is gone. So you're seeing things like the lightning discharges going off on random players in the group, and you can see people are just kind of starting to rot down to that general damage as well.
Yeah, we also see some of the CCs coming out here because some of those mobs actually run away when they're low HP. We do remember that from some previous dungeons as well, like Toldagor, where you had just the mobs run away once they were low, which caused some issues with, for example, Sanguine just being spawned all over the room. So that's why we see some of those utility abilities like the Frost Nova being used by Petco, making sure they don't run away. You can still get the AoE damage down. And we also see a prideful skip here, interestingly enough, because Hakar is the next boss, which is one of the most difficult bosses to deal with, specifically on higher keys and on Tyrannical, because if you don't have enough damage to nuke the boss down fast enough, you're just going to have all sorts of issues with those suns that start AoE pulsing on your group, and the blood shield from the boss is just going to get bigger and bigger the more ads you have alive, and the boss fight is just going to be really prolonged. So interesting to see that they skip it. Maybe they just pulled it in after this trash pack. Anyway, we'll see what they do once this trash pack is done.
Interesting to see something happening to Golden Guardians here where they're unable to really deal with these final 2 High Priests, and I didn't quite see what happened, but it's important to mention that these High Priests in this section of the dungeon pretty much behave differently from a lot of other mobs in the game. Now, similar to other humanoid mobs, they kind of get feared and flee when they hit 20% HP, but for some reason High Priests just keep doing it. They never return to the group. So I wonder if there's a chance that it just ran off to a corner and healed itself, because they were dealing with those final 2 High Priests for quite a while there.
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility, because they can be incredibly annoying and just get a heal off. If they're really far away, it's really hard for any of them to interrupt it as well. So that's definitely a possibility. As we see the question marks now fighting Hakar, they did not go back to do the Pride buff, so no Pride for them. They also don't use Bloodlust here. So yeah, they're just gonna whittle down the boss, I guess, without using any of their major. There we go. The Bloodlust is being popped right now. I assume they were waiting for some of their cooldowns, specifically the Unholy DK's cooldowns, because Unholy DKs do have an insane amount of single target bursts. This scales incredibly well with Bloodlust, so that's probably what they were waiting for.
Yeah, it looks like they're specifically waiting on the Army of the Dead and for the end of the Bloodlust also include the combustion from the mage just being popped here as well. But all of that delay from them has allowed Golden Guardians to get themselves back in the race, committing the Bloodlust on the pole with that 30% damage from the Prideful buff. And look how fast the boss is melting for Golden Guardians, already making up almost all of the difference. When they pulled the boss, Quintuple Question Mark was at 40%. They are now only 10% behind, well, about 15% behind, but still, the gap is being closed for Golden Guardians here.
Yeah, I'm really questioning the decision to skip this one specific Pride, because the Pride buff doesn't give any sort of trash percentage. Of course, it gives you the damage buff, which can be incredibly nice, but most of the time, the damage buff that you gain from the Pride does not make up for the time that you lose for having to kill it without being able to pull anything on top of it. So it's very inefficient. But for this boss in particular, it's usually worth it to do because you do the boss so much faster, and the way the boss works just makes it so the longer you fight the boss, the longer it really takes because of all of the suns that are spawning. So it's really just incredibly dangerous to have a long fight on this boss specifically. But yeah, it looks like Question Marks not even dealing with the Pride when they go back either. We see Fem just taunting it away from the group, then everyone just goes back and Shadow Melts again. So they just decided that it's faster to not deal with this one.
Yeah, and unfortunately for Golden Guardians, there another death on that first boss in Hikar, which actually kind of ended up costing them all the time that they saved by using the Prideful on the boss. So 2 deaths on the board for them now, and not really much of a time advantage gained from being able to use that Prideful.
Yeah, we see them move on the Question Mark side, dealing with these 2 Warlords. Looks like they're dealing with them alone, which also seems a little bit inefficient, but they don't have a Raging Dispel, and those Warlords can be pretty dangerous on a tank. We see Fem just walking away, having to kite them off because of the double Raging effect that is on them. So that might be the reason why they decided to not pull anything on top initially. Now they're pulling it on top once the Raging actually disappeared. I do believe it's a 10-second Raging buff, so once it disappears, they can just pull the Bone Soldiers on top, making sure they're nuking everything down at the same time, while looks like the Golden Guardians on the other side did this pull that the Question Marks did before. So just doing a similar trash pull, but just something that the Question Mark already did before they went into this room.
Yeah, it's important to mention as well, we talked about this very briefly at the beginning of the, but before this dungeon started, those Undying Warlords, they have an ability that they cast called Undying Rage. It's a 15-second buff that makes them unable to die for the entire duration of the buff, and neither of these teams have a Soothe to get rid of that. So it's really important that you beat the second Undying Rage cast, otherwise you just have to look at that mob running at you for 15 seconds whenever you'd like to be moving on with the rest of the dungeon. So that did happen to the Question Marks here. They did lose a little bit of time because of that, but they're just quickly moving on to skip the rest of this section of the dungeon with their invisibility potions.
Yeah, I really like this skip specifically just because this whole area, this whole room is just so inefficient to deal with because they have a bunch of really high HP mobs, and some of them, you have the machines that need to be line of sighted as well because they cast this AoE ability, just does a huge amount of damage to your group. So just incredibly inefficient for them to deal with. That's why we see a lot of those groups skipping this, and now we see them just gather up all of these lubricators with maybe even the next trash group as well, these Sentinels. And this is a dangerous pull because these lubricators, they have a heal that if it goes through, it's incredibly bad, obviously. But then you also have the Sentinels casting this oil, which goes on random players, which does an insane amount of damage as well. And then you also have this cast that just went off that gives you a debuff that reduces your hit chance. So that's definitely an interesting pull that they are doing on the Question Mark side, but looks like they're pulling it off and also spawning the Pride.
Ooh, that was not perfect, but nobody goes down just yet, so it looks like they're just barely able to get themselves through. Yeah, fortunately enough, both teams have a lot of AoECC tools with the Vigid Seaman Hunter and the Windwalker Monk in order to make sure they can interrupt most of the cast without having to worry about their actual interrupt rotation, and they're able to just barely eke through that pull without anybody going down. We're going to see Golden Guardians going for something similar here in a bit, but they're actually dealing with this first trash pack that I believe we saw Question Mark just completely skip.
Yeah, these are the mobs that I set I think are pretty inefficient to do. I mean, percentage-wise, they do give a decent amount of percentage, but it's just there's barely anything you can pull on top. And you see how long it took them to get this trash down, while on the other side, question marks, they're already in the boss, and they're up to 41% as well. So they're ahead in percentage and ahead in dungeon timer as well. So this is really just question marks game at this point. They're decently far ahead, also have the difference in deaths, 10 seconds in favor of question marks because of this 2 extra deaths that the Golden Guardians has. And now they're fighting against Millhouse, Mana Storm, and this boss can be dangerous, but if you play it properly with the stuns specifically, then it shouldn't be a problem for them.
Yep, and we see something similar going to be coming out here from Golden Guardians, although they didn't proc their Prideful here. They're just going to be running through without procking that. And Lip, oh no. Lip got hit by the sludge and fell off. They're going to have to get a mass res on him. That's really unfortunate to see. It's just going to cost them the mass res timer and the extra 5 seconds on the board. But yeah, that was just unfortunate timing. I think they kind of got rushed by the quaking there because there were 3 of them stacked, and I think he tried to blink through. But yeah, that's really unfortunate timing there.
Yeah, blink can be incredibly tricky on this in this area because sometimes you think you'll just, I'm just going to blink through, but then you're blinking in place because sometimes the elevation of this specific area makes blink not work properly. And I've seen many Night Fae blinks not work out the way they wanted to and just get hit by this ability. So that might be something that happened there, just the blink not working out properly. But anyway, they did manage to get the rest back up, and now Golden Guard is also fighting that same boss. But none of them have Bloodlust available to them, but it's really not needed for this fight specifically, as long as we play the Shadow Fury correctly. And we saw Kure on the question marks team did just put the Shadow Nova on the boss. It is always the stun that is being casted by the opposite boss that is not currently active. You either have this zigzag stun where 2 people get an arrow over their heads and they want to make sure the stun is going through the boss. So one person needs to position on one side of the boss, the other person needs to position on the other side, making sure the stun goes through the boss. And in the other phase, you have the Shadow Fury cast where you have a purple circle around you and you want to make sure the boss is inside the circle. And at the same time, you also want to make sure no one else, like the tank, is not in the circle. Otherwise, they're getting stunned as well.
Yep, just interesting, dichotomy where the bosses are able to deal with each other's mechanics as long as you don't finish off one of them. And it looks like question mark team is going to be finishing off Millhouse here, so they'll have to make sure they deal with Maleficent before she gets to that Rocket Barrage cast. Otherwise, they're going to be in for a world of hurt.
Yep, definitely want to make sure they finish this boss off. Looks like we have some coolness available, like Combustion by Pekko. Not really sure if you might want to hold on to it because the boss is quite low already, so maybe holding on to the Combustion for the next trash pull. We'll see what they decide to do. On the other hand, Golden Guardians just trying to catch up, really. They did pull the boss quite later, so definitely a little bit of a difference here in damage. And percentage-wise, 3% difference, it's really not that big of a deal, right? As long as you do the same amount of trash pulls, if there's some extra mobs in one pull, it could mean it's basically nothing, right? So these 3% really don't mean that much. It is a difference in Pride, though, right? Because we only saw one Pride being procced by the Golden Guardians that they played for Hakar, while the question marks triggered 2 Prides and they skipped both of them.
Very dangerous moment here for Golden Guardians. Maleficent Manastorm is at 52% HP, and they didn't really have that many cooldowns available for this phase. They have to get her down to 10%. It looks like the damage is going to be there. They're not going to be getting that Rocket Barrage cast. Should be totally fine on their end. Looking at the timers here, I believe quick question mark team got their kill at about 12:52 on the timer. Golden Guardians getting their kill here at about 13:45, so almost an entire minute behind on this boss split, and they still have that second Prideful to deal with, whereas question mark has already dealt with that. They dealt with it right before the boss here. We did see Faith going down for question mark early on here. They did commit their battle res to that, so both teams are down to just having one battle res left right now. But man, the time difference right now, question mark has secured a massive lead for themselves so far early on in the dungeon.
Yeah, they really need to make sure they're playing clean for the rest of the dungeon. This would be an incredible win for them, for the question mark team, because, the Golden Guardians, right, they're such a known team. They've been just doing so incredibly well previously in the MDI. So question mark, a team that is not having the record that Golden Guardians has is going to be a pretty big upset if they win this game here. They're also the number 8 seed, right? So this is incredibly well played by Question Mark so far, as they did have this issue with Faithy going down, which cost them a couple of seconds, unfortunately, before they got the battle rest back up, since they had to use that engineering rest, because Faithy is the DK with the normal battle rest available to them. So it took a little bit longer to get him back up, but did manage, as they're now moving on to this trash pack, I believe they skipped earlier. So this is the trash pack at the start of the dungeon, as far as I'm aware. So they're dealing with Enraged Spirit first, because they probably do not want to pull the Enraged Spirit on top of it, because this mob is just so incredibly dangerous.
That's right, they still do have the trash pack at the start of the dungeon, and you can actually see it there on the top left. This is the trash pack that's in front of the Ardenwald zone, so they still do at some point in the dungeon have to deal with that trash pack at the start, I'm pretty sure. Otherwise, they're going to have to somehow deal with it while they're fighting Mizala. So not exactly what you want to see. That being said, Golden Guardians have had some unfortunate happenings on their side. Shakib has gone down to this manifestation of pride, but they have the checkpoint after killing the second boss, so he's able to instantly release and be right back with the group. But that is, yet again, another 5-second death timer on the board when they're already as far behind as they are. Not exactly what you want to see happen for them.
Yeah, so some unfortunate things for Golden Guardians, as JB is also completely so this might just be a wipe. I'm not sure if they can stay alive with JB having exactly 0 mana, and looks like Lip is just popping the Ice Block here while the Cauterize is being procced, and they did manage to finish it off. But yeah, just so many issues for them, up to 8 deaths at this point. And one thing I just saw by Question Marks is that they did skip that trash pack in front of this this area again with Shadow Mount. So they really might be up to some trash with boss pull at the very end. Otherwise, they might not be skipping that much trash right in front of these areas, committing their Shadow Melt specifically for this skip. There really must be some interesting thing happening at the very end of this dungeon for Question Marks.
Yeah, for sure. And here we go. This is just going to be trash bonanza here. I'm kind of sad that we have bolstering in this dungeon this week, because I'd really love to see teams just go for it here and pull literally every single mob in this week of the dungeon. But, maybe we'll see that in a future week. That being said, 50% of your trash is going to come from this section of the dungeon, minus the first trash pack, of course. And it's just going to be AoE pack after AoE pack. Now, I'm interested to see how big they actually plan on going, specifically when they get to that Night Elf urn that will stun everything for them. I feel like we're going to see the biggest pull there, but we have a little bit of ways to go before we get to that.
Yeah, so they were very patient there as well, gathering up this pool. We saw the Fear Sigil coming out of Fem on the Vengeance Demon Hunter, and then gathered the rest of the patrol, the packs that they wanted to pull on top, making sure they're just waiting until everything is gathered, and then they start doing damage. That is really something that we don't see happen very often on those live server keys, where the tank tries to gather 3 trash packs, but people just can't hold their DPS, and they just get aggro from random mobs that are just trying to get gathered by the tank and die. So definitely well done, making sure they're holding off with their damage until everything is nicely stacked, and much easier for them to get the aggro that way, because they don't have a hunter or a rogue to help out with that aggro. So definitely something they have to consider as well. Fem dropping incredibly low as they're trying to skip that Pride mob again, but did manage to survive, and they all Shadow Melted off the aggro as well, looks like.
And that was a very scary moment for them too, because he doesn't have that last resort available, and having to commit the battle res there would just mean one less, potential fix for a mistake later in the dungeon be available for them. So they do have another battle res in about 2 minutes coming up for them, so maybe it wasn't the worst thing in the world to happen, but any death at this point means, it's a res timer, it's having to wait for them to get rebuffed and maybe get their food buff. It's not exactly what you want to see happen in the middle of the dungeon. So being able to have that not happen is just a huge time save for them.
Yeah, definitely. It looks like they finished off another trash pack here. I think this whole wing specifically, this broker wing, the Night Fae wing, just has so much efficient trash that we see the teams pull, just because you can like barely any of this trash has any difficult or dangerous mechanics. So you can pull so many trash packs on top of each other, and that's why we see so much percentage that they need to reach the 100% enemy forces. It's just being done in this area specifically because of the huge pulls they can do. And we see the mini boss even being pulled here by question marks as they pull a bunch of the other mobs on top as well. Looks like they use the Night Fae stun as well to make sure they just get less damage on Fem, basically, because the rest of the mobs really don't do anything to the group. It's really just tank damage that is dangerous in this area.
Yeah, especially when you're on those Blade Beak pulls, right? Because they do a stacking debuff where they make the tank take more and more damage from those Blade Beaks. So yeah, you really have to keep an eye on the tanks here. But that being said, keep an eye on Golden Guardians here. They're pulling a Prideful with trash, and Yoda has gone down, and they don't have a battle res available just yet. They'll have one coming up in about 30 seconds, but he won't be available for the rest of this pull. So they'll have to just, regular res him up right after the pull here. They went for a big pull, but they're still 12% behind on trash.
Yeah, they're quite a bit behind, not just in trash, but also like the extra deaths, the 8 deaths difference, 40 seconds in favor of question marks. Like they really have to do something, some crazy pull that they need to make up the time between those two teams right now. And we know that the question mark team has an insane pull for themselves later on if they do what we think they're gonna do by pulling the last boss with that trash on top of it. So we'll see. But right now, it's looking very good for question marks as they're just dealing with more and more trash in this area, just dealing with these beakhorns, as you said, just very dangerous for the tank. You see Fem has 13 debuffs as he's just leaping away, trying to survive by this Blade Beak just being so incredibly buffed by the Raging effect as well. And they triggered the 4th Pride. We see Fem just taunting it away. Then he's probably just going to leap to the group, and everyone is shadow melting at the same time. Fem just needs to be careful. There we go, getting gripped by Jeeth. Unfortunately, he gripped him into the stun, but he'd still managed to shadow melt off the aggro, so good job by them. And now they're gathering the next trash pack.
Yep, just grabbing another trash. Oh, whoa. I had to calm down there for a second because it looks like Jeeth had aggro on one of those invisible packs of Spriggan there and almost went down because of it, but able to get aggro onto Fem there. Bit of a sketchy moment for them, but they're just able to get this trash pack together and start aiming it down. And yeah, it's just comes down to how much actual damage you can belt out here, while also making sure you're maintaining their health pool so that nothing gets bolstered by too much, right? The bolstering affix really comes into play here. Even on Tyrannical, where the trash doesn't have as much HP as it could have, it's really important not to over bolster any of these mobs.
Yeah, definitely. You're just going to be wasting so much time if you nuke one of the ads too early, or you're pulling a higher HP mobs with low HP mobs and you're just not being careful with the damage. Definitely a huge time loss, but question mark really handling bolstering quite well so far. It's just really dangerous with the beak that we saw earlier with the Blade Beak when Fem just had to leap away, but still managed to finish it off there at the very end with all of those bolstering stacks on top. And now they're up to 88% trash. It doesn't look like they need that much more trash, considering if they actually do this interesting boss pull with trash at the end, maybe they somehow manage to skip it, because thinking about the amount of trash percentage they're still going to get here, they're really not going to be missing that much. We'll see what they do, but they're finishing this one off, and we see the trash percentage they're going closer and closer to that 100% that they need.
Yeah, this should be all they need if you factor in that first trash pack at the start of the dungeon. So we shouldn't see them pull anything else and just go straight into the boss. Now, they don't get the manifestation of pride here with this boss, which they would probably lust on if they weren't doing that strat. Actually, I'd be very surprised to see them use their bloodlust here, considering they do have to deal with that trash pack, maybe even with the boss. So yeah, not being able to lust this boss on Tyrannical sounds like a pretty sketchy scenario to be in. It's a very difficult boss, even on only plus 18. But yeah, it's a lot of damage to your group.
Yeah, definitely. This boss can be incredibly dangerous. The one thing that is probably the most dangerous in this fight is this lightning bolt debuff that basically does sticking damage to you and also initial damage. And the longer the debuff is on you, you get a higher stacking debuff that increases arcane damage taken. So you always give it to the closest person to you. It will always jump person, and if it jumps back and forth between two players, you will never actually get rid of that damage taken increase, because it just continues stacking and there's no way of it falling off. So what you want to do, you want to make sure it's jumping between different people. So give it to the tank first, then one of the melees, then a healer, then the range, and then back to the tank. Otherwise, if it only jumps between two people, you're definitely going to die. But it looks like they're doing a very good job handling this lightning debuff, making sure it's definitely not going back and forth between only two people.
And a quick little sanity check here, as the Bloodlust is actually popped for Team Question Mark, so they won't have available for the pull that we've been talking about for a while. They are at 95% trash. That first trash pack at the start of the dungeon is all that they will need in order to finish off their trash count. That being said, Golden Guardians have clawed themselves back here and will be finishing off their 100% trash mark by finishing off this last pack that they're AoEing. So they are actually still making up that gap here. They will have the Prideful available should they choose to kill it for this boss, but I'd be surprised if they actually end up single targeting it down considering how far behind they are. And they probably also will be bloodlusting this boss. So yes, there still is a pretty massive advantage in terms of time and dungeon progression, 14 question mark, but Golden Guardians has been making that gap up here.
Yeah, they're definitely doing a good job dealing with this area specifically. Golden Guardians looked like they just risked more with their pulls, which can be incredibly dangerous because of that bolstering affix, but they did a really, really good job making sure they're dealing with it properly and not losing too much time at all on their side. And it looks like they're also dealing with the Pride mob. So they did proc that last Pride, dealing with it, making sure they have this extra damage for this boss specifically, and it also worked. Oh no, Petco actually going down, unfortunately, right at the very end here for a question mark, as they were moving to that teleport portion of the room that enables when the boss dies. And there's a little bit of an animation when the boss goes down where you just get where you're just levitating in the air, and when somebody is talking to you for a little while, it's a little bit of an RP event when the boss dies. But if you click this the animation or the tiny little teleport that spawns when the boss dies, then you're basically skipping the levitate and the RP, which is exactly what question mark did there. But unfortunately, Petco went down, so he needs to wait until the spawn point is unlocked so he can release, and then he will spawn right in front of this area.
And Curry actually just needs to walk forward just a little bit for him to be able to release. Wait, okay, he's good. Okay. Yeah, that would have been really unfortunate if he released and actually released at the boss. That would have been pretty unfortunate for them. But he is now here, and they have this last trash pack to deal with. Now, you can see that first trash pack at the start of the dungeon off on the right that they still haven't dealt with, but they didn't deal with this trash pack either. They definitely know something we don't know, right? Because this trash pack will get them to 100%, and there's still the trash pack that was the first pack in the dungeon. I just want to see what it is that they're going to do in order to not have to deal with that, because that seems very dangerous.
Yeah, and it seems interesting because they're also going to be at 100% after this. Oh, so that's why they're going back. So they're moving backwards because they know they're going to spawn Pride soon, and they're just going to Shadow Melt off the aggro, I would assume. We'll still have to see how they skip the rest of the trash. Unfortunately, Yoda went down for Golden Guardians on the fight. They had to use their last battle rest available to them to get Yoda back up. So they're out of battle rests now, but they just downed the boss. So they're going to be fighting that last boss on Golden Guardian side 2 in a second. So this might just be closer than we thought. It's still a pretty big difference in time because of the deaths in favor of question mark, but it looks like they didn't manage to do the skip properly. So, okay, so they just finished off the trash, and now they're going to do the Shadow Melt. So let's see if they can pull off the skip. Looks like Jeeth got stunned here, which made...
Oh,
yeah,
no.
They didn't manage. They did not manage to skip this Pride. They have to deal with it at this point. And we also see the cooldown.
Petco gets hit too.
Petco getting stunned. He needs to use his ice mode to survive here, but he had his combustion up. So this is a huge damage loss for him getting stunned here and also needing to use that ice block. We'll see if they can do this still. While on the other hand, Golden Guardian is just fighting the boss right now, or just trying to pull the boss at this point.
I mean, Team Question Mark is fumbling hard right now. That probably cost them about 30 seconds there. And on top of that, it also cost them their ice block cooldown. So should anything go wrong on this boss, they're not going to have it available, and they're not going to have their combust to get the boss's HP down here. You are able to actually combust this first phase and then also have it up for the intermission phase to deal with your ad quicker, but the boss HP is just going to be very high because of that now, and it allows Golden Guardians to actually pull the boss at roughly the exact same time as Team Question Mark. So their progression in the dungeon is almost exactly the same. However, there still is that extra 40 seconds of death timers on the board that is going to be incredibly difficult for Golden Guardians to chew through.
Yeah, I think 40 seconds is actually just too big of a difference to make up on this boss. Because on this boss specifically, as long as you one phase, so as long as you get all of the mirror images down in one intermission phase, they should be able to kill the boss right as they come back. It is tyrannical, and sometimes on hierarchies, you don't have enough damage when you come back, and you just need to play the fight a little while longer. But with the amount of gear they have and with the amount of damage, I think they should be able to kill it pretty quickly. And therefore, the only way, in my opinion, for Golden Guardians to win this is if Question Mark somehow doesn't manage to kill all of the mirror images here in this first intermission, which seems incredibly unlikely.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm still perplexed as to what is going to happen here. Once these 4 mirror images die, they're all going to be yanked to what I assume would be the front platform of the room. And there's still trash there. So
yeah, there is trash. That is
I don't
true.
know what their plan is for dealing with that. They're already at 100% trash, so they don't really need to. Oh, it just spawned at the back of the room instead because maybe it just works that way if there's still trash there. I don't actually know how that works, how the spawn points work for this boss. Huh.
Well, looks like Question Mark knew exactly what is going to happen, and they knew they can just skip this first trash pack there. And after the haste buff, Musella is down to 15%. So that means they still have to fight this boss for a little bit, since the boss fight is over at 10%, meaning they still have to chew through a little bit of the boss's HP, but they should be fine, as they also just got the combustion from Petco back up as well. And yeah, they should be fine. On the other side, Golden Guardians also managed to get back to the boss as well.
They didn't deal with all 4 images. Yeah, they only killed 3 of them. So yeah, it's not going to be enough here.
They still wouldn't have made it anyway, but yeah.
Yeah,
wow,
Team Question Mark would have to all jump off the edge for sure in order for Golden Guardians to win at this point. So yeah, Team Question Mark, with only 2% left on the boss's HP here, are going to be taking game 1 of this series, and that's going to be sending us to some Tyrannocyte, which is going to be an interesting second match of the series.
Yeah, definitely. Mists is a dungeon that we unfortunately had some issues with yesterday, but it all should be resolved for today's game. So it should be a very interesting one between Question Mark and Golden Guardians. And Golden Guardians still having a chance to win this series, of course, since it is a best of 3. But this first game going to Question Mark as they finish off Musella, and what a run it was for them. Well done.
Yeah, despite a little bit of stumbling at the very finish line, they do end up pulling it out. Penta question marks, excuse me, does take out that victory over the Golden Guardians, who just couldn't really seem to get their mojo working on this one, Dranos.
Yeah, maybe they needed to keep some of it and not give it all back to Bwansamdi in here.
That's true. You don't want to be putting out some loans and everything like that. You don't want to leverage your position too badly, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was a great run for the Question Marks as well in here. This, we got to remember, this is the 8th seeded team coming into our tournament, right? And they've managed to put up a run here that, I mean, this looked absolutely competitive with any of the teams in our tournament today, up to, and I think even including Echo. So really, really strong showing here. And I think it really just goes to show that any 2 teams that we put together from these 8 are going to produce a great series if we play them against each other.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think in many cases, it's probably the most competitive that we've had MDI yet, Nagura. Usually we don't see these 8th seeds putting up as great of a fight as we've consistently seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that we have both regions now together really is causing these kind of close matches, and there's some teams that didn't qualify at all. I mean, I've looked at the time trial times, and there are some teams who previously competed in the MDI either on EU or NA regions, and this time they just didn't manage to get into the top 8. So it really shows how good all of those teams are and how close to each other they are. So very close matches and very just exciting to watch for us.
That's right. And let's start looking again, Dranos, here at the other side. In Golden Guardians, what was going on with them the whole game, really?
Yeah, it was a rough one for Golden Guardians. We started off here with a different strategy at the start from the Question Marks, skipping this first pull, and then they found a way to never have to deal with it. They found a way to influence where Moezela ended up going so that they ended up going to an empty platform later. Here we can see the Question Marks as well, pulling off a triple sentient oil double lubricator pull that other teams have been too scared to try and execute. They've just been deploying that AoE crowd control, letting a couple casts go off and healing through it as well with that barrier that you saw down from Jeeth, and they actually made that massive pull work out. Meanwhile, disaster struck for Golden Guardians in many places in this dungeon, but especially here where they had a quaking overlap lead into a blink, lead into getting knocked off of that pipe. one of several random deaths throughout the run for them, in addition to this Prideful causing them a serious time loss, as they'd already had a death early in this Pride, but as the end of the Pride, at its 20 stacks, with their healer out of mana, things just became too much for them. They procced Cauterize and 3 deaths there. Now on the side of the question marks, Prides went a little bit differently. They successfully skipped the manifestation here, but Jeeth noticed that he was targeted by the boast here, and he actually life grips here, and this is a great life grip. You life grip your tank into the stun, and that really asserts dominance as the healer role. You make sure your tank knows who is the boss there, and they have a little bit of time in that stun to think about it. But Fem, he reacted to that, and he decided he was going to one-up Jeeth here. So he comes down the stairs, gets the boast of his own, and bang, snipes Jeeth. Some may say it messes up their meld skip here, and they had to kill a Pride at a time that was not ideal, but they ended up winning anyway, so worked out for them just fine, and Fem reasserted his dominance as the tank in the team. Really great play of those Prides by the question marks.
Yeah, it's just really a big drama kind of unfolding before our very eyes between these teams, just little backstabs and counter betrayals and triple agents, Zyro. It's really just, one of the greatest stories ever told.
I don't even know what you're saying right now. Yeah. I'm just looking forward to this miss, man. I know Golden Guardians are all just really unhappy with the way they've played right now and looking to come back strong on this next map.
That's right. And, Mist, of course, as we'd mentioned previously, is just one that's been very frustrating for the Golden Guardians team. A lot of the different bugs, for example, that they'd experienced and their opponents had experienced with the maze have now been resolved. So the consistency should be a lot higher for them. And at this point, Nagura, they're facing elimination right now at this map. And a bit ironic that this is the map that they're going to, that they're facing elimination on, but they got to be able to bounce back here.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel bad that they have to play this Mists dungeon that they had so many issues on yesterday. It wasn't their fault that they had issues on. There was some bugs in the dungeon with the maze, but those are resolved now, and they know exactly which maze they're gonna get, and they're also gonna be getting the same mobs. They know which mobs they're gonna be getting, so hopefully they can bounce back, as you said, and that's really something that they're used to as well. I mean, they have been competing so many times, and they should be able to keep their cool and just focus on this dungeon specifically without having to think of something that happened yesterday or happened before. So they really should be able to just keep it together and win this game, and hopefully also win the next game if they want to win this series. Otherwise, of course, it is question mark that will move on if they win this Mist here.
Yeah, and we're seeing, a lot tighter competition throughout a lot of this tournament and everything like that. And Mist is really just from the very beginning, Zyro, it was looking at which of these teams was able to actually push that first boss fast enough when we're in a tyrannical environment, and how stressful that can be.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think we saw it from Obey Alliance yesterday, where they were able to actually just completely one-phase the boss and get it down to like 3% after the first damage amp. And that just set them up for success instantly. Like that won them the dungeon pretty much in and of its own right. And I'm sure both of these teams were able to see them pull that off and maybe potentially just kind of tweak their strat to introduce that into the strategy. I'd love to see that. That'd be some pretty cool on-the-fly matchmaking, considering how important this match is. If you're out now in the lower bracket, you go home. And I really don't think Lighty wants his legacy to be going out in the lower bracket 0-2 in his final MDI.
Oh, certainly not. Even if they are playing from home, they don't want to go home. They want to keep on going through the bracket while they can play the game at home. But let's go into it. Mist is Hirnasai underway. Penta question marks, also known as the inscrutable quantum device, versus the Golden Guardians.
All right, so let's look what those teams are going to be doing in this dungeon here specifically. Of course, we've seen Golden Guardians do this dungeon already yesterday. Question marks we haven't seen yet in Mist specifically, so let's see what kind of strategies they do. And we also see the Moonkin being used by Kurisu on the question mark side. So double Moonkin, but we still see a difference. We see the DK on Golden Guardian side, while we see the Hunter on question mark side. So triple range DPS for the question marks.
Yeah, but that DK, as we know, has some of the best 20 to 30 second damage single target burst in the game, and is going to be incredibly useful to help them push that single target burst on the first boss. However, like you said, both teams playing the Moonkin just to help out with that convoke burst damage should let them pretty easily one phase. But it's really going to come down to who's able to get the most damage in that first initial burn phase. That being said, this first trash pack going down at roughly the same speed for both teams. Yeah, pretty interesting to see. But it's really going to come down to the first boss, right? We're gonna have a very good idea of who has an advantage in this dungeon once we get through that first boss.
Yeah, looks like both of the teams did manage to deal with this first pull perfectly, as they're now skipping the trash on Golden Guardian side and on the question mark side as well, making sure they're getting past all of this trash that they don't want to deal with. Now they're opening up this area, which you can only do if you have a Night Fae in the group. So both of the teams having a Night Fae, making sure they get the Mushroom buff, which gives you a stat increase. So intellect, agility, or strength, depending on what class you play. And now we see a pretty big pull by question marks as they're just gathering up the two bigger mobs with the trash pack in front. This is something we've seen the groups do before, but the inspired mob is being CC'd by the question marks, wanting to not deal with that at all, so they can still interrupt and stand those mobs that they're dealing with right now.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we're seeing similar pulls from both teams, right? They were able to kind of rip apart those strats from yesterday and put the best of them together. It looks like for the time being, Golden Guardians is actually going a little bit faster. Although JJB dropping down to 10% HP with that Prideful up, he's going to have to keep an eye on himself. And all of Golden Guardians going down incredibly low. They have the battle res for Yoda, so it shouldn't be too big of an issue, but they really have to get this Pride down low. I wonder if they're going to actually go for, either of these teams is actually go for adopting the strat that we saw from Obey Alliance, where they get this Prideful down incredibly low, but then actually leave it dead at like 5%, and then they can finish it off while they're mid-boss combat. That Soul Cleaver being here shouldn't be too big of an issue if they are going for that Shadow Melt strat.
I really like that Shadow Melt strat that we saw yesterday. Like, it just made this boss look so incredibly easy. Just in case you guys missed it, they just Shadow Melted off the Pride once the Pride was low HP. So they were just getting it low, jumping away, Shadow Melting. And the way the Pride works, the manifestation of Pride, does not regen HP if you de-aggro it. But we see a huge problem for Golden Guardians. So I have to interrupt my speech here there for a second. They tried to reset the aggro exactly the way we were just talking about, but they had some deaths as it was happening. So they have to rest everyone back up, and just problems after problems for Golden Guardians, unfortunately. They managed to rest them back, but this is just a pretty big time loss for them.
That being said, if they're able to get a better burn phase on this first boss than what we can see from the question mark team, that will make up the difference. Setting this up perfectly is very, very, very important. And I think the initial burst damage that is available for Team Question Mark with the Hunter instead of the DK is definitely a lot lower than what we'll see from Golden Guardians. However, we are going to see the burst phase first from Team Question Mark. Reminder that the actual mark that you need to hit in order to be able to one-phase this boss is something around 18%. Is that a Mind Control Soul Cleaver coming in from G here? Is that actually helping them do a lot of damage? Oh my god, that boss got completely destroyed.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay, so there's a bunch of things that happens. First of all, Jeeth had this mind-controlled Soul Cleaver, which helped him out in this intermission phase on the boss damage. But what also happened was Kurisu got a full moon in his Convoke at the start. And that's actually a big difference, yeah? Someone can get a full moon during the Convoke, and someone can get a full moon at the very start of your Convoke, because you do have a legendary that gives you crit as soon as you enter Eclipse. And if you get a full moon, as soon as you press your cooldowns, then that full moon is definitely going to crit. And that is what happened for Kurisu. He did a huge amount of burst damage to that boss with his full moon proccing at the very beginning of his Convoke. So well procced by them, I guess, and also well done with the mind control on the Soul Cleaver. I really like that strategy, just basically enabling them to one-phase the boss so quickly without having to do this the Pride shenanigans that we saw the other teams do. So I really prefer this strategy over the Shadow Melt, the Pride that we saw other teams do, and now also Golden Guardians attempt.
Yeah, really important for Golden Guardians to actually match that one phase here, and the boss is melting, but it doesn't look like they're going to get it completely dead in the phase like we saw from the Team Question Mark. Team Question Mark just full killed the boss in the damage amp, but Golden Guardians only was able to get it to about 16%. Now, that is low enough for them to finish off the boss here without having to kill Droman again, but the time lost from having to chew through the boss's HP without the damage amp on it it can't be measured. It's so much. And Team Question Mark is already on to their second trash pack in the maze section of the dungeon. They're actually so far ahead right now that, I mean, Golden Guardians just kind of needs them to wipe or mess up the maze several times in order to come back in this dungeon.
Yeah, question mark's definitely quite a bit ahead at this point. Just playing incredibly clean on their first showing in Mist here. This first time we see them in this dungeon, just doing such a good job. Also innovating some stuff as well here with the Soul Cleaver. So well done by them. As they deal with some of the mobs in this maze, looks like they might be skipping this Pride. Yes, so they all walked to one side of the room, making sure the Pride spawns there, and then they jumped to the exit of the maze, making sure they Shadow Melt off the aggro and moving on. So now, the mobs in this maze are not actually that dangerous. They can be annoying if you don't interrupt properly. Then you can get some roots out that might be annoying. You can get some heals as well. So you do want to make sure you interrupt the proper casts. But as long as you do interrupt those, then it really shouldn't cause any sort of problems for these teams.
Yep, for sure. I mean, this is really a section of the dungeon where ideally these teams are never going to have an issue with the maze, right? Usually you'll just have, like we were talking about yesterday, usually on live it's a healer's job in order to deal with that. But in these cases where you have a boomkin able to run around while they're in stellar drift and not really lose any damage, they can deal with and find the symbols much more easily than pretty much anyone else in the group can. So there's really no major damage loss for them. And obviously all of these players are some of the best players in WoW. So if they were to ever actually fail the maze and have the right symbols on the pillars, there would be something wrong.
Yes, definitely. As they now have to fight the frog. This is one of the 3 mini bosses in this maze that they have to deal with. This frog really probably the easiest one, I would even say, out of all of the bosses. Not that the other would be much more difficult, but this one just leaps around once in a while, so you have to dodge out of the way. And then you also need to dodge this tongue lash, basically. It's a frontal cast onto the tank, so you don't want to stand in front if you're not the tank. And you also want to go out of this AoE that happens. Now, since question marks are playing a full range comp, it's actually a little bit better for them. They gain a little bit of damage, I would say, by not having to dodge that AoE, or at least still doing damage while it's happening, while on the other side, Golden Guardians having this DK means Shakib might just have to run out and lose a little bit of damage, or he just uses AMS and doesn't care about it.
Yep, that's one of the great parts about DK. Not only does DK have one of the best personal cooldowns in the game in AMS, which is pretty much a cloak on a 1-minute cooldown, they also have 10% more HP than everybody. They have Army of the Dead, which makes them do more damage than everybody. They have the best execute in the game. They bring AMC. Kind of reminds me of what we were talking about with Rogue a couple seasons ago, where they just bring everything in at the same time. They're just such a strong class right now. But even with all that said, they're getting beat by a team that doesn't have one right now. So interesting to see teams bringing out different comps for some of these dungeons and able to actually just show us what differences in comps can do.
Yeah, I mean, for Mist specifically, I think this is such an interesting dungeon because the maze area can just not be sped up, right? Because the doors are closed and you can only open them when you're out of combat. So you need to finish off the trash and then you can only go through the maze. That basically means that you cannot pull multiple areas together. There's the only way to speed up the maze is to kill the existing trash that is there faster. But you can't do any sort of insanely big pulls where you just bring a DK, you pull everything, and you just AoE things down. So having consistent damage is much, much better for the maze section, at least, than having like insanely big cooldowns every couple of minutes. So just building comps around that stuff is also something that we might see specifically for this dungeon. And we also see a lot of Moonkins here just because of this. I think it's mainly because of this very first boss that just saves you so much time if you manage to finish him off in one phase. This is tyrannical though, and I do think this is going to be different on Fortified, because on Fortified it's going to be a lot easier to one phase the boss without needing an insane amount of single target bursts. So the comps might just be looking different if this dungeon is going to be Fortified.
I mean, I definitely can see that point, but I feel like there might even be a scenario where you play Moonkin anyways to burst it, and then you just save cooldowns for trash packs afterwards, right? I think both of those scenarios are possible scenarios. But of course, we are still stuck in this week, and there still is at least half of this dungeon left to go. Actually, a little less than that, but you know, we're talking about semantics here. There is a lot of room left for either of these teams to still make mistakes. So Golden Guardians isn't quite out of it yet, but they still have a lot of ground to make up here, as Team Question Mark is already halfway through this Mistcaller boss, while Golden Guardians is still dealing with the final trash pack in that maze. So no maze mishaps today. Neither of the teams had any issues finding the correct pathway through, but still, that first boss strategy with Jeeth mind controlling the mob and doing extra damage to the boss, plus the full moon RNG just really opened up the advantage here for them.
Yeah, definitely. And we now see Jeeth using that PI, just helping out damage from Petco a little on his Fire Mage, popping that combustion, making sure they get through the intermission phase faster. This boss here, Mistcaller specifically, casts the intermission phase 3 times per fight, and it's percentage based, so you can't actually skip an intermission phase, or you can't really necessarily speed up this fight as much. So it's not like the first boss where you can skip one whole phase by just having more damage. Since this one, as I said, is percentage based, we were talking about maybe skipping the last intermission phase, because she starts casting it at 10%, and you could theoretically be nuking the boss so quickly that she does not finish the cast, and you can kill her before she gets the damage decrease. But it is tyrannical, and that would require an insane amount of damage in a very, very short time. So it doesn't look like any of those teams are even attempting that, but might be something they will see on Fortified.
Yeah, I think if you had like your Combustion Convoke available, it's definitely possible to burst through. On Tyrannical 18, it'd be about 200,000 damage that you have to get through in the space of 2 or 3 seconds, depending on the boss's spell queuing. But the biggest problem is you won't have those cooldowns available for the trash pack right afterwards, which will make it last probably longer than what the intermission phase will last. So it's definitely an interesting idea, but I just don't know if it's necessarily the better thing to do in the long run for the dungeon.
Yeah, maybe only if you manage to somehow get it done with like a Windwalker's Touch of Death, because that one wouldn't be as big of a loss to use, right? So that's definitely something they should figure out for Fortified keys, and we will see later on once we have different affixes. But for Tyrannical, definitely not something those teams are attempting to do. And yeah, we see Golden Guardians are now also, of course, on this boss as well. They're on their second intermission phase, so they have to go through one more after this one. While the question marks, on the other hand, using their slow falls to skip this trash pack. This is something we've seen before, which, to be honest, I'm still not really sure if this is even faster, because you can just skip this by using the normal Demon Hunter cage, and then just walking through. So looks like Fem actually had to use the Shadow Melt here, because he didn't manage to jump over, and Petco as well. I'm not sure if this is going to cause some issue with Pride skip timings for them. But yeah, they definitely had to use that Shadow Melt, because they unfortunately aggroed the pack while they were flying over it. They just got too close.
Yeah, definitely a little weird. I think it actually is a time save. So when you're levitating down, you're actually traveling a lot slower than just ground mount speed. So while it does seem like it's a pretty cool idea to slow fall or levitate all the way down, it's probably just faster to mount and run by. That being said, the only thing we're really looking at is the fact that they had to use their shadow molds in order to skip that, because it looks like, for instance, the mage didn't quite make it past the trash pack, so Fem had to go back and grab aggro, so the mage didn't instantly die. And that's really going to cause them to not be able to skip this next Pride. They have to deal with this Pride now because they don't have that shadow melt.
Yeah, this is actually going to cause some... This might be a pretty big time loss for them now. This is definitely not something... Or I assume at least that this is not going to be something that they have planned, because otherwise they wouldn't be doing this whole slow fall skip. Otherwise, they could just normally walk past. So now they're dealing with the inspired mobs at the same time as also dealing with the Pride. This can be incredibly dangerous, because we also have these Reavers who jump to random players and apply poison debuffs. Now, thankfully, Kuri can actually dispel that one on his druid, so he can help out with that one. But just the amount of damage happening on the group right now, you can see how many issues Fem is having, specifically having to deal with the trash and the Pride and also the AoE that is happening at the same time.
Yep.
Baby has 2 debuffs and going down, yeah.
Oh, that's... Yeah, this is... I struggle to think that this is something that they plan to do, right? Because normally you wouldn't want to have this prideful happen here. And you can see the issue that is causing. Faithy going down. Looks like Petco might also go down too. That they still do have their cooldowns available for the next pull. It only really costs them the 1 res and the cauterize cooldown and the block cooldown, which is a lot of tools being used. But that being said, they're still able to run straight into this next boss with the rest of the trash they need. They still do have the Bloodlust available, and they have that prideful buff rolling. Whereas Golden Guardians is still trying to finish off that initial pull. Yeah,
I mean, some issues here for question mark, but very well recovered by them, to be honest. even though that death on Faithy happened, they still had the battle rest available to get him back up, and they did recover. And now we see this huge pull happening with that pride buff as well, using the bloodlust, making sure they have all of those offensives available to them. Unfortunately, they don't have combustion or celestial alignment by the Moonkin. They still managed to get through this trash really quickly by just nuking it down with that pride buff as well. And now they still have to deal with Tredova. Tredova on a tyrannical environment can be dangerous, but definitely got nerfed quite a bit, quite many times between beta and now. So definitely a lot easier than what it used to, and there should be no problem for a question mark to deal with it.
Yep, for sure. And actually, like you mentioned, they just have that 1% trash left, so they can instantly go and kill one of the larvae on the other side of the boss to finish off the trash percentage once the boss is dead. So really, all that is between Team Question Mark and taking a 2-0 series in the lower bracket over Golden Guardians is 50% left on Tredova. But as you guys know, she is one of the strongest bosses and smartest bosses in the dungeon. She can tell exactly where you are and follow your every move.
Yeah, she definitely remembers how you dodge those swirlies underneath you, and then the next time she does the ability, she will predict your movement that you did last time to dodge it and put one swirly there as well. So this is definitely an ability that I think is very interesting, and that's not something you want to do, actually. Did you see what Faithy just did, just randomly disengaging out of it? That's actually the worst thing you can do. Theoretically, the way you want to handle this ability is by just taking one small step to the side or to the front or to the right, depending on what you did last time, to not make it spread out all over the room. So that is why all of those swirlies are being so spread. And this can be decently dangerous, because if you're just minding your own business, trying to dodge your own swirlies, and then all of a sudden someone else's swirlies are spawning on top of you because the last time they blinked out of it, then it can cause some issues. But these players, they are very good, and they should be able to handle them no matter how far apart they're spawning. And that's exactly what they're doing as Tredova is dropping lower and lower.
Yep, with Tredova now below 10%, Golden Guardians has to just hope for a wipe coming out of nowhere for Team Question Mark, but that is not going to be the case as Tredova goes down and the last percentage of trash goes down, and Team Question Mark is taking a massive upset 2-0 win over the Golden Guardians.
That's right. And, this team mixed up of Echo and Method players, some former MDI competitors coming together the first time as a team together, taking down some of the oldest veterans that MDI has to offer. This is absolutely insane. Congratulations to Penta Question Marks on this big victory. And Dranos, that is